Welcome everyone for the first CrySP Speaker Series seminar for this academic year. I apologize for the delay. We had a little bit of technical difficulties in getting the AV set up, but now we are there. I hope you can all hear us and see us. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Gururaj Saileshwar to be our first speaker in this series for this academic year. Gururaj is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, where he just started. Before that, he got his PhD from Georgia Tech, and then spent a year with NVIDIA as a postdoctoral researcher. He's a computer architect, but as we all know, all computer architects in the last 5 years have started to worry about security. So he works at the intersection of computer architecture and security. He's a rising star. He has won several awards, both for his papers, but also for his dissertations. And today he's going to talk about his work on side channel attacks and their implications. And Gururaj, I think you are ready to take questions during the talk as well, and then we'll hopefully have some time at the end. So join me in welcoming Gururaj.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Often people say that I'm a security person when I'm talking to a computer architect, and people say I'm a computer architect when I'm talking to a security person. So you'll see what I am in this talk. So as Ashokan said, please stop me at any point if you have any question, either on Zoom or in person. Okay, so why do we care about hardware security, right? Think about when we want to store any valuable item, like jewelry, use a safe. But a safe is only as secure as its underlying material. For example, a safe cracker can simply take a stethoscope onto the safe's surface and leak the combination of the safe by moving the dial of the safe and hearing the vibrations from the material, right? Or if the safe's material is brittle, you can just take a hammer and break it open. So just like a safe is only as secure as its underlying material, computer systems are only as secure as the underlying hardware. And we're seeing many emerging threats in the last 5 years that allow the security of the entire system to get breached because of vulnerabilities at the hardware layer. For instance, there are a ton of side channel attacks that we've all become familiar with, the most famous being Spectre and Malware. And like you can break a safe with a hammer, you can break memories with row hammer. There are fault injection attacks that you can induce by simply hammering a certain memory. And these are getting worse as we speak. And okay, so why hardware security? Clearly hardware security is important, but why now? Well, if you look at some of the top security conferences the last half a decade, on the y-axis, it shows the total percentage of papers, attack papers. And you'll see that the percentage of hardware-based attacks is just growing. At the same time, it's getting harder and harder to design very practical defenses. Shown here is the classic Moore's law. The number of transistors you can put on a chip is getting, we're hitting physical limits. Y-axis shows the number of transistors, x-axis shows the number of years. It's getting harder and harder to have defenses that cost a lot to adopt, right? So on one hand, the attacks are getting worse. On the other hand, it's getting harder and harder to practical defenses. So we really need people at the interface who can understand how attacks are going to evolve and who can design not just principled defenses, but also practical low-cost defenses that are used. So this is where we find ourselves, and this is why it's interesting. But it's also very challenging to have very principled defenses in microarchitectural security. On the attack front, it's extremely hard to understand the threat landscape because, well, hardware is a black box. We don't know what companies like Intel and AMD have put under the covers, right? And so every 3 months or 6 months, with every Oakland and Unix security conference, we get new attacks that are wilder than the previous. And at the same time, it's difficult to build enduring defenses that can stand the test of time. Because, well, hardware designers don't understand the threat surface. So you design a defense that gets broken because of adaptive attacks, and then you design new defenses. So in this talk, I'll try to convince you that, well, it's not that bad. I'll give you an example of a new attack that we discovered where we were able to reverse engineer a lot of the information in the modern CPU with some understanding of computer architecture. And then with some understanding of security, we are able to design practical defenses that can stand the test of time. So I'll talk about our Scoop attack that was published at Oakland earlier this year. And then I'll also talk about my work on Mirage, which is principled defense against cache attacks that has kind of ended in arms race. So without ado, let's first jump into Mirage. This was work done when I was a PhD student at Georgia Tech and published at Mixed Security. So what's the problem? Well, in processors, getting data from the memory is extremely slow. It can take off the order of hundreds of nanoseconds. So to make processors consume data fast, we have caches, which are faster memories that allow data to come back in tens of nanoseconds, or maybe 1 nanosecond. The problem is that now there is a timing difference between data present in the cache and data not present in the cache, which leads to side channels. Why are these problematic? Well, this cache itself is a shared structure, which could be shared between two cores that have different processes. We have a spy process and a victim process running simultaneously that share a set of the cache. This shared set has a deterministic mapping between addresses to the cache set locations. So you could have set conflicts, which are contentions between two processes for the limited cache set space. A spy process fills a cache set with its addresses, allows the victim to execute and evict one of the spy's addresses. And now, based on whether the spy observes a cache miss for its address, it can know that, well, the victim process accessed that set. And because there is a deterministic relationship between sets and addresses, so the spy can know which address the victim accessed. And if this address is now secret dependent, you can leak the secret of the victim. And this is a classic attack that has been shown to leak information like, say, AES-keys, fingerprint websites in browsers, leak models in machine learning, etc. Well, a key requirement for this kind of an attack is this episode of a set conflict, where the spy and victim contend for the cache set. And to observe this cache set conflict, the spy needs a set of addresses, a minimal set that can map to this cache set, and which can deterministically evict a victim's address. Construction of this eviction set is a critical step in attack, and we'll see how this plays a role in both attack and defense. So prior defenses have tried two broad approaches. One is, slice the cache to insulate the activity across processes. This is, of course, inefficient because, well, if you slice it along ways, there are only few ways in the cache. So you can only get few cache partitions, right? If you have more number of cores than the number of partitions you can get, well, that's really not practical. On the other hand, people have also tried to randomize the mapping of addresses to cache sets to kind of obfuscate the patterns of that. This is, in fact, easy to do because it just requires you to change this mapping function. But we've seen several randomized cache defenses break down with adaptive attacks in a matter of months. Let's see why. In this research, we try to ask the question, can we even design randomized caches that can be principled and not break down in its security months? So to understand why randomized caches have been entered into the work, let's try to understand the arms race that has occurred in this space. So it started in 2015 Oakland, when the first eviction set discovery algorithm was proposed, which showed that you can have a eviction set constructed for a cache in order of n square accesses if you have a cache of n addresses. This typically means that you can construct an eviction set in a matter of seconds, because the cache typically has about 10,000 addresses. So this was able to construct eviction set on proprietary Intel caches, which had a proprietary map. Well, with this attack, in 2018, the first randomized cache, practical randomized cache was proposed, which had a cipher-based mapping of addresses set, which randomized the mapping, and then it dynamically changed that mapping so that before the eviction set could be constructed, the mapping changes, and so you're able to defeat the prior attack. Well, with new defense, there came a new attack in a matter of 6 months, where the order of n square attack got converted to an order of n attack. So basically, before the mapping could be changed, the eviction set could be constructed, the mapping could be leaked out, and you could have the defense broken. Okay. So now we have a faster attack. What comes next? Well, a better defense. So a new defense was proposed in Usenix Security 2019 and ISCA 2019. Again, in a matter of 6 months, that, since we have a faster attack, they said, let's make the randomization or obfuscation more extensive. So rather than using one randomizing function, they said, let's use two, so that the space of eviction set discovery grows. And so the prior order of n attack no longer is successful. This probabilistically chooses the mapping function in which the address needs to be installed. With a probabilistic defense, then a new probabilistic attack came, which said, okay, we won't be able to discover a eviction set deterministically, but we'll still discover one probabilistically in order of n access. So again, you had the defense breakdown in order of n accesses. So long story short, you've seen attacks breaking defenses in a matter of months. The key reason why this happens is because they continue to allow set conflicts to occur, although they obfuscate the pattern of set. So all a attack needs is sufficient time and intelligence so that it can reverse engineer where these set conflicts are occurring, and they can continue to launch a conflict-based attack. So what we observed was that, well, if you want to eliminate these attacks, you really need to eliminate set conflicts. And to do that, we said, okay, what's the simplest cache that we know that does not have set? Well, a cache that is fully associative. A fully associative cache is one where a new address can map to any location in the cache, not just a single set, any location. So there's no concept of sets. An address can map to any location, so it can evict any address from the cache. So a spy that observes evictions from the cache learns zero information about addresses that are installed in. Right? This solves this problem of set conflict-based information. The problem is that this provides great security, but this is extremely hard to implement. Why? Well, imagine trying to search for an address among tens of thousands of addresses in a last level cache. If you just had to do an exhaustive search because a line can map to any location in the cache, it's going to take more time than just looking up the DRAM, right? It's going to be extremely slow. And for these reasons, fully associative last level cache will never be used, right? Always you have set. So what we really want is the practical lookup of a set associative cache where you only need to look up a single set of 8 or 16 addresses, but you want the evictions of a fully associative cache so that you get great security. How do we do this? Right? To answer this, let's take a simple mental problem. Let's model the randomized set associative cache in the form of a bucket and balls problem. Here, this is a classic problem where balls are nothing but addresses and buckets are nothing but sets, cache sets. each bucket has W capacity, means each set has W weights, right? So when you install a new, so what we're doing for randomized caches is we are throwing balls randomly into buckets. So here we are going to throw 16 balls in buckets of 4 capacity to model a 4-way cache. And when you install a new address, you also remove an address from the cache, right? So similarly, when you throw a ball, you also remove a ball because of limited capacity of the bucket. When you remove a ball from the same bucket where you installed the ball, we call it a bucket overflow, but it's equivalent to a set associative eviction or a set. So let's imagine a situation where we're throwing 16 balls in 4 buckets of 4 capacity. Of course, every ball throw, you're going to have a bucket overflow. And so you're going to have a set associative eviction. Now, what if you double the capacity of these buckets, but throw the same number of balls? Now you have some leftover empty space in each of the buckets. So when you throw a ball, you don't need to remove a ball from the same set. You can actually do like a global remove, right? If you can pick up bucket randomly and remove a random ball when you throw a new ball. So this is equivalent to the global eviction that you get in a fully associative cache. The problem is that, well, you can have skews in distribution of balls in buckets, right? Because you're throwing balls randomly. So you can have skews where, one bucket gets completely full. And in this situation, you have to incur a bucket overflow or a bucket set. However, if you want, so bucket overflows are reduced, but you still incur. Ideally, we want to eliminate. So what we observed is that now, instead of using one random choice of bucket, what if you use 2 random choice of buckets, and you always pick the lower loaded bucket, okay, to install your ball. Mixenmacher in 1996 showed this, modeled it, and showed that if you over-provision bucket capacity sufficiently and use these 2 choices and load-aware install, you get a very balanced distribution of balls in buckets. So you won't have skews like these ever. You'll always have a very balanced load of balls in buckets, and you'll never incur a bucket overflow. You can continue to have global removals of balls. So this is the technique that we use in Mirage, right? Over provisioning of the cache and power of 2 choices. In fact, we try to model this analytically and also empirically. On the y-axis, we show the balls that you need to throw before you get a bucket overflow. And the x-axis shows the amount of extra capacity you need to provision per bucket with default capacity here. So you'll see here that with each unit increase in bucket capacity, the number of balls you need to throw before you get a bucket overflow squares. So it starts off with about 10 power 1, then it goes 10 power 2, 10 power 4, 10 power 8, 10 power 16, and then 10 power 3. Right? So with just like 5 or 6 additional capacity in each bucket, you get an insanely strong guarantee that you need to throw about 10 power 34 balls before you get a bucket overflow or a setup. So essentially, what you need to do in our cache parlance is that you need to over-provision the cache set by about 75%. And if you have the power of 2 choices based indexing, you get a set associative eviction in 10 power 17 or 10 power 34 address installs, which takes more time than the lifetime of the units. Okay. So, okay. So now that we know how to theoretically get this strong guarantee, how do we practically implement? Well, over-provisioning the cache is actually expensive, right? Think about a cache with 75% extra capacity. No one wants to pay that cost. But what we realized is that, well, the cache itself is split into 2 structures. The tag store, it stores the metadata or cache lines. And then the data storage stores the actual data. And the ratio of the sizes is that the tags are cheap, data is expensive. So in conventional caches, you have a 1-to-1 correspondence between the 2. We said, let's break that 1-to-1 correspondence and let's have pointers to associate tags with data. What this allows you to do is just over-provision the tag store and keep the data store the same, right? So we have 75% extra tags for over provisioning our buckets while we keep the data store the same. So overall, the extra storage overheads of the cache is quite insignificant. And now, if a new line comes in and it finds invalid tag in the index set, it can avoid a set associative conflict. It can map to a random data store entry and evict a random address from the cache in a globally random manner. And so long as the invalid tags are present in the index set, you never incur a set associative eviction. You continue to have globally random evictions. To guarantee that you have invalid tags present in index set, we use our power of two choices index. So we split the tag store into two structures. Each have some extra capacity. And when a new line comes in, it looks up two sets, one in each partition. And it always picks the set which is lower loaded between the two choices. So in this case, the bottom set has more invalid tags. So it has lesser load. So the new line goes to that set between these two choices. This leads to a very balanced distribution of valid tags across the sets. And this gives a guarantee that a new line always finds an invalid tag in the index set, and you always have globally random evictions. And you never incur a set associative eviction with about 75% extra tag or 20% extra load. So the set associative evictions that cause information leakage practically never occur in the lifetime. We modeled this design in GEM5, a cycle accurate simulator, and we compared this against scatter cache, which was Unix security 19, the prior best. And shown on the y-axis is the performance normalized to a non-secure cache, and the x-axis shows the workload. On average, Mirage incurs about 2% slowdown, which is very similar to scatter cache, the prior. And Mirage provides considerably better security than that, which was broken. So the takeaway from this is that, well, Mirage provides this abstraction of a fully associative cache to the software, but internally allows for set associative lookups where you have a practical design, practical energy, practical lookup latency, and limited impact on performance. So the impact of this work was that, well, between 2018 and 2020, we saw 5 different randomized caches being proposed, and all of those got broken in a matter of months. Mirage since 2020 has been unbroken. Questions so far? Yes.
So in terms of the replacement policy of the cache, does it always have to be fully random, or can we sort of use some form of least recently used or something like that?
That's a very good question, right? So the question was, is the replacement policy globally random always, or can we use intelligent replacement? So the reason we use random replacement, globally random replacement policy is because the replacement policy itself can leak information. There are attacks that have shown that if you have intelligent replacement, the order of evictions or replacements from the cache can also be used as a side channel to leak information about addresses that could be stored. So to eliminate all forms of shared cache information leakage, we adopted a fully associative cache with globally random evictions. You could potentially add in intelligence, but that's going to trade off security.
So like you had the depiction of the tags and the data caches, and I was wondering how the pointers would change when you're doing the eviction. Like I was trying to figure out the correspondence between the balls and bins and this.
Yeah, problem. So that's a great question. So how do the pointers really work in terms of indexing and eviction? So think about it. So 2 aspects to the cache, right? Lookup and replace. When you want to look up the cache, you basically index into the set that you would index into it. You would check all of the tags in that set. If it's a hit, you traverse the forward pointer, so FPTR, from the tag to the data, get the data up. Simple. For replacements, let's say your lookup said cache miss, and you want to install that line. What you do is you randomly pick a data store entry, throw away that entry, right? Evict the data. You traverse the reverse pointer back to the tag to evict the tag as well, right? So random tag gets evicted from the entire cache, and the new line in the index set has the invalid tag. It just installs its tag in that invalid tag and links its forward pointer to the evicted data store entry, right? So that's basically how you use the forward and backward.
Which line you pick to put in the new entry depends on the ones that you chose out of the two with a random scheme, right?
So the placement of the address is decoupled from the replacement of the victim, right? So victim gets replaced from a random location. The placement is always in the index set, one of the index sets, which are guaranteed to have the invalid tag, and you put the line in one of those systems. Okay, sounds good. Well, so we saw how one can get principal security with limited impact on performance. So you had a question? Oh, okay. Cool. So next, let's look at new attacks. Right? So this was some work that I started when I was at Gururaj in summer of 2021, when I was visiting the Corsic group with Daniel Graf. So this is a new attack that we discovered by exploiting contention in CPU scheduler queues. So what are CPU schedulers? Well, in a typical out-of-order CPU, which is pick a CPU that you're using right now, it's out-of-order CPU. Basically, you have a pipeline execution. You have fetch, decode, you decide which instruction type it is, and you put it inside a queue. And then whenever the dependencies of that instruction get satisfied, like the sources get ready, the instruction is scheduled and it runs on one of the function units. And then it returns. So the fetch and decode are in order, but the scheduling and the execution are out of order. It can be executed in whatever manner as far as the data dependencies are satisfied. So in Intel CPU, the queue where the instructions sit is a unified queue, and the instructions get scheduled from this large queue onto the function units as per the whenever the dependency gets satisfied. On an AMD CPU, the architecture is slightly different. The fetch and decode happen very similar to the Intel CPU, but the queues in which the instructions sit are actually disaggregated. They're separate based on instruction type. So you have several scheduler queues sitting inside the processor attached to different functional units. You have all of the blue boxes are different functional units, and you have 4 different scheduler queues based on the type. This architecture is also something that you will see in the new Apple CPUs, which is taken to the limit, where here you have about 4 schedulers, there you have about 10 schedulers. So as the queue sizes grow, like the number of instructions that can be scheduled at a time grow, it becomes harder and harder to have a unified scheduler because scheduler is larger, you have power issues. So you're likely to see more of these distributed scheduler designs. What's the problem with this? Well, scheduler type depends on the instruction type. And if the scheduler itself is shared between multiple threads running at the same time on a CPU, well, maybe you can have some contention on these schedulers. Can we spy on instructions as they're executing by observing this contention on the scheduler queue? Well, to answer this, let's consider a simple thread model. You have a physical core, AMD CPU, and you have 2 threads that can run simultaneously in multi-threading. Thread 0 and thread 1 are running on logical core 0 and logical core 1. Both are simultaneously running on a single physical core. Now, you can imagine that one of these threads is untrusted, running an attacker program. The other thread is running a victim code that is running some instructions. But we want to figure out, like the attacker wants to spy on a multiply instruction inside of the victim code. Without direct access, let's assume that either the attacker and victim are in different processes or even in different VMs, right? So the attacker does not have direct inspection ability to the victim's code, but can the attacker observe the execution of this multiplies based on some side channel like scheduler? To answer this, let's look at how this multiply is going to get scheduled onto the CPU. So you have, let's say you have multiplies coming from two threads, right? Thread 2 and thread 1. And they're going to get fetched and decoded separately, but they're going to share this scheduler queues and function units. So both multiplies are always going to get mapped to scheduler that is highlighted in the dark orange. And both multiplies can only be mapped to one particular function unit, which is ALU1, because, well, that's the execution unit that unfortunately can only multiply. None of the other ones can perform them. This scheduler queue has limited capacity. So if you'll imagine one particular thread doing a lot of multiplies, eats up all of the resources of the scheduler queue, the other thread is not going to be able to do any multiply. Right? So it almost becomes like a traffic jam, right? Like the contention for that particular scheduler queue causes a jam. So we're going to leverage that traffic jam to leak the multiplies that are occurring in the victim to the attacker. So let's visualize this, right? Let's visualize a scenario where you have, this queues. You have the ALU Q1, through which the multiplies can flow through, and then you have ALU Q 0, 2, 3, through which the other instructions can flow. Okay? Now, if you have a set of instructions like read PRU, multiply, read PRU. This is a sequence of instructions that are flowing through a particular thread. Let's assume there is a particular instruction like SQR square root, which is really long latency instruction that is just hogging all of the resources attached to ALU Q1. So nothing can go past Q1. Okay. So in this case, the read PRU instruction, which is basically like a timer instruction, which gives a CPU timer value, that just goes through the ALU Q0, right? It just flows. Multiplies are going to ALU Q1 and they're kind of stuck, right? Your read PRUs can just keep flowing through. And so if you measure the timing difference between the two read PRU readings, you get a very small delta T, right? So when you have low multiply queue occupancy, which is like, unless the capacity is just fully occupied or less than fully occupied, you'll see the read PRUs go through very quickly. Right? So less contention. Now, instead, if you had a lot of multiplies, what would happen in that? So we have a similar sequence where you have read PRU and a bunch of multiplies. But now in this turn lane, which is like the multiply queue, it gets stuck, right? The capacity is only 2, but now you have more than 2 multiplies trying to fit into that queue. So there's a traffic jam. And now this traffic jam allows the previous read PRUs to go through, but this read PRU, which is stuck in this traffic jam, stuck, right? This essentially causes a pipeline stall. So if you think about it in terms of the architecture, basically all of the instructions that were fetched before the stalling instruction get executed. All instructions that were fetched after the stalling instruction just get stalled, right? So you get a really large pipeline stall. This is bad for performance, but great for leaking. So in this case, you're going to be able to observe the high multiply queue occupancy based on a really large delta T that you measure between the two read PRUs. this timing, oops. Folks on the Zoom still see my screen? Oh, sorry. So this timing difference between low queue occupancy and high queue occupancy actually can be measured very, very clearly. So on the y-axis here, I show the delta T, which is the number of cycles that you measure with the difference between the two. And the x-axis shows the number of multiplies that we are sandwiching the two. And what you'll see is graph for 3 different CPUs, Zen 2 and Zen 3 are the AMD design, and Comet Lake is the Intel design. You will notice that there jumps in the delta T, close to 16 for Zen 2 and close to 22 for Zen 3, which basically shows that you're kind of hitting the capacity of the queues. You can't fit more than 16 or 22 multiplies in that queue before you get a big increase in the contention measurement on the y-axis. So this allows us to very nicely measure the capacity of these scheduler nodes. This matches very closely to the number that is publicly shared by AMD in their documentation. So this side channel allows us to measure the contention or the capacity of the scheduler queue pretty nicely. Can we use it to do something more malicious? Well, of course, we can construct a covert channel, right? You have 2 threads. The spy thread basically has this read PRU and then a bunch of multiplies and then another read PRU. And the Trojan that wants to send information can either do a multiply to send bit 0, a bit 1, and not do any multiply to send a bit 0. As long as the multipliers on the spy side are just about filling the capacity of the queue, if there is no multiply from the Trojan side, the delta T is small because you just about are filling the capacity of the queue. But if there is a multiply, then it causes contention, which the spies multiplies, and that causes the capacity to be overflow. And then you have a pipeline stall, and then you have a really large timing difference, right? So this allows you to send information of 1 or 0 from the Trojan to the spy. And using this mechanism, we were able to construct a covert channel. It's a bit hairy, but the lead author on this, Stefan, did an excellent job in demonstrating that we could have almost 2 megabits per second covert channel across process and about 1 megabits per second across VMs at very low error rates. So covert channels, but can we do something even more malicious than this? Well, multiplies, if you can observe multiplies, then you can actually leak a lot more information. So think about a RSA square multiply algorithm where based on the key bit values, if the key bit value is 0, in each iteration of a loop, you simply square the intermediate result. And if the bit value is 1, you not just square, but also multiply the intermediate result with a constant. So if you're able to measure multiplies or observe when multiplies are being executed, you can learn when you have ones in your key, and you can leak the RSA right, bit by bit. So shown here on the y-axis is the moving average of the delta T across several traces, about 50,000 traces that we took of this RSA execution, and the x-axis just shows time or sample number that we are taking. And we have multiple samples for execution of a loop, and you will observe spikes in the delta T values on the y, right? Those correspond to 1s, and you have big valleys in between. So the valleys are basically 0s, which did not induce any contention. And because we know the approximate time it takes for performing each iteration, we can figure out how many zeros should fall within the value. So we are able to leak out the key bit by bit. So you have ones for all the peaks, zeros for all the valleys, and you can basically leak the entire out. This particular attack can be launched across processes or inside VMs, and also from when you have one RSA running inside a trusted execution environment and the other outside of the TEE, it works well. But with about 50,000 traces per key, Stefan was able to extract out the entire RSA key with very few errors. So with an edit distance of about 5 or 17 in the two different scenarios, we were able to leak out an entire 4,000-bit RSA key in less than an hour. This is pretty bad. So the impact of this work was that, well, AMD came out with a CVE and a security bulletin. And although we studied this on Zen 2 and Zen 3, AMD discovered that this affects Zen 1, Zen 2, Zen 3, all of the designs, practically all of AMD's out-of-order designs that come out in the last 5 to 10 years, and a bunch of products across desktop, mobile, server. The only way to mitigate this is either on the hardware, use a unified scheduler, which is of course very power intensive and hence maybe impractical, or partition the scheduler queues across threads, right? So two threads should not be able to get the entire access to the queue at the same time. Either you temporally partition the queues or spatially partition the queues, but you basically have a way to hide the contention. A simpler method to solve this in software is to basically say, well, let's just not map two destructive threads on the same physical code at the same time. So, questions? Yes. Yeah, so that's a great question. So let me see if I have one slide that I would like to share. Yeah. So the origins of this actually are from the M1. So the way we stumbled on this was we were looking at the M1 architecture and we realized, hey, this is a really large instruction window for 600 plus instructions. How does it schedule these instructions? And we realized, well, it has a distributed scheduler. And we said, okay, maybe we can exploit. The hard part is that you can have similar contention, but you can't have multi-threading because they have not yet enabled multi-threading on the Apple CPUs yet. Which is why we moved on to other CPUs that have multi-threading. And we realized that AMD CPUs have very similar architecture and also multi-threading, and hence we can. So in future, if Apple decides to actually have multi-threading, we might be able to launch similar attacks on this. Yeah.
There was slide 62. There was this performance of like a jump when you hit the number of multiplications in the queue, and then for Comet Lake it goes down. Do you have any idea why that would happen?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I do not, but I will think about it.
Thank you.
But I think the what we were looking for is a spike, and we really saw it being flat. I would say maybe this is
they use a common scheduler, right?
Yeah. There's a unified scheduler, so there really is no you really see contention on the entire ROP, right? So you really would need to stuff maybe 200 multiplications before you see a spike. Yeah, I don't quite know why the it goes down. Yeah.
So another question. So AMD, they said that they were gonna like move to a unified schedule instead, or did they say like what they were gonna do, or?
No, they said use constant time.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
So what are the performance costs of the partitioning of the partition scheduler, like based on the time or the space?
That's a good question, right? So a lot of these mitigations come at a big performance impact. And if I were to guess, you would have like about 20-30% performance loss if you just partition all of the schedulers. Mainly because SMT gets a big performance boost due to sharing of these resources. So when one thread is not doing a lot of noise, the other thread can just flood the processor with noise, right? So that's really the downside. If you start having partition function units, then you end up with performance loss. So maybe that's not something we'll see AMD doing, but yeah, if you have really large amount of resources, then maybe partitioning does not come with as big of a performance hit. So yeah, probably we may or may not see that. Yeah.
All right. I want to ask you, so why Intel is still persistent on using them?
That's a good question, right? Yeah, so the question was, unified schedulers are power intensive. Why does Intel use it? I don't know, because I am not from Intel. But if I were to guess, right? So Intel has done a lot of things the Intel way for decades, right? So we are seeing this hitting of power limits, the last 5-10 years. So maybe it's possible that Intel also moves to distributed schedulers in the future, because I don't see a clear way in which you can have 700 entry unified scheduler. Maybe you have a single unified queue, but maybe you do your scheduling decision on subsets of the queue. Maybe that's a possible middle ground that we might be already doing. I don't know. Unless we reverse engineer it, it's going to be hard to see why. But I can see that all of the other companies like Apple and AMD seem to be doubling down on more and more distributed scheduling.
So there are no questions online, right?
Okay, so I'm just going to go to the last part of my talk, which is conclusion and some ongoing work. So to conclude, I think it is pretty evident that security is extremely crucial for next generation hardware. Academia takes it seriously, industry takes it very seriously. The challenge is that, to get principal differences, you really need cross-domain expertise, right? You need expertise in security to understand how attacks are going to evolve, and you need expertise in hardware to be able to, design principal defenses. And at the same time, to understand the threat landscape, you need a lot of hardware knowledge to be able to reverse engineer things. So you need a lot of cross-layer thinking, cross-layer solutions, and cross-layer teams. But it is safe to say that we need secure hardware, and there can't be any secure system without secure infrastructure. In Toronto, in my lab, SIT lab, we're trying to solve this for the next generation. So one area that we're working on is the rowhammer attack. So I talked a lot about side channels that can leak information. Another big threat in hardware today is fault injection via software access that leverages inherent unreliable hardware. So with rowhammer, you can have an unprivileged adversary hammer one location in DRAM and induce bit flips in neighboring locations of DRAM. And this has been used for privilege escalation, information leakage, tampering of tenant data, and so on. So we've done a bunch of work in coming up with scalable defenses and defense in depth techniques. But there's a lot of work to be done. So one of the areas that we're working on is trying to see emerging hardware and try to demonstrate the vulnerability in emerging hardware that we don't understand fully, so that we can actually understand the threat landscape going forward. And at the same time, we're also thinking about how to have very low cost defenses that can make exploits way harder by introducing obfuscation, randomization, etc. The other broad area of work in my group is on automated techniques to detect side channels. Often, side channels are detected when the hardware comes out, and a lot of smart reverse engineers try and craft intelligent techniques and demonstrate attack. But we really need to do this at design time, right? Because if your hardware is already in the market and you come up with a vulnerability, it's going to take at least 5 to 10 years. So you really need to be detecting these at design time, and we lack tools and methodologies to do so. So we're looking at different approaches, including fuzzing and formal methods to reason about side channels at design time in efficient manner. And lastly, we're everybody's doing machine learning or studying machine learning or using machine learning. We're doing so as well. So the industry is moving towards domain-specific hardware, domain-specific runtimes for machine learning. But old hardware and new hardware, the vulnerabilities are the same. As long as you have, memories, you're going to have rowhammer. As long as you have sharing, you have side channels. So we are trying to design machine learning models that are resilient to these hardware threats. If any of this interests you and you're looking for grad school, please join us. This is a really nice city. You must come and visit Toronto, of course. If you're already in grad school, please tell your friends or your students. I'm hiding. Thank you. And if you just want to visit Toronto, always happy to visit.
Thank you, Gururaj. So if there are students who want to talk to him more, there's a student meeting at 1 o'clock. What's the venue? So it's at 1 o'clock. Hossam is the person is coordinating that. So if he doesn't find the room number, you BC 2310. If you are not a student but want to have a chat with him, I think at 2 o'clock we have a slot that's open. So reach out to me either in person or just message me or call me or whatever, and we'll be able to fit that in. So with that, I think if there are some urgent questions we could take now. Does anybody want to ask an urgent question? Otherwise, I'll encourage you to have an offline chat with them. So I like the 3 bullet points that you had. The last bullet point where you said there's no secure systems with trusted hardware. I would agree that there is no cost-effective secure system without trusted hardware. So I think we are aligned with that. So with that, let's thank Gururaj that he gets to have lunch.
Thank you.
And then if you want to meet with him, come talk to me or